Assalamu alaikum. We're going to give folks a few minutes to come in, and then we're going to get started relatively quickly.
Mm.
Assalamu alaikum. We're letting folks in little by little. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm going to do a brief introduction, but know that you can add questions into the chat. We are going to have, because we have three speakers with a lot of information, we are going to um, uh, hold off on questions until the end of the presentations. But we did set aside time, so we will be able to address those. Okay, I'm going to give folks 3 more minutes, and then we will get started. In the meantime, I will do a brief introduction of myself and Peaceful Families, and then I'm going to have our speakers introduce themselves and their organizations, because they are the experts on those things as we move forward. For those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Denicia Berthe. I happen to be a licensed clinical psychologist, as well as having the honor of serving as the executive director of Peaceful Families Project. For those of you who do not know Peaceful Families Project, we are an adult organization. I say that because we now have been in existence for over 21 years last year, with the explicit goal of eliminating family-based violence within the Muslim community. The way that we do that is a little bit different than maybe some of the ways that you're used to sort of having organizations manage at. So we are focused on training, and a lot of some of some of which is virtual, like our presentation tonight, a lot of which is training of trainers. So folks come into us, get information, and then take it back out to seed in their communities, as well as training of systems that touch Muslim lives. Lawyers, doctors, policymakers, and those kinds of things are where we spend most of our time. We also spend a lot of energy on research. Many of you know that family functioning in Muslim homes has not been the sort of focus of mainstream research. So we do a lot of work to make sure that we have data on many of these topics: intimate partner violence, positive functioning in parenting, all of these kinds of things. We have ongoing research projects right now, if anyone is interested, on our website. We are running a study of Muslim men looking at attitudes, beliefs, and experiences with family based violence. We also have a hot off the press new survey going out looking at Muslim youth 18 to 24, attitudes and beliefs toward about family violence, but also something called courtship coercion, sort of this unjust practices during the courtship process. So feel free to either go online and fill those out yourselves, or have somebody in your family or network do that if you think that they might be interested. So other than training and research, we at Peaceful Families create resources. We have 5 different curriculums. We have programming really addressing the continuum of family life within Muslim communities. And the fourth thing that we do is what's called strategic representation, which means we are at the generally national level filling in the voices of and representing the voices of Muslim communities in the tables where they need to be. The Administration of Children and Families, the Office of Violence Against Women, the Department of Justice, all of those places that where decisions are being made around Muslim lives, and ensuring that Muslim voices are there. I am very, very excited to host today's conversation for a variety of reasons. creating safe spaces for Muslim youth in transition is part of the continuum of what PFP does. We cannot work on parenting and partnering and all of these kinds of things without recognizing the need of Muslims, especially in transition and especially in the ages where they are not able to make decisions for themselves, that exists for them. This is also important to us because we know that other than Muslims, there are Christian and Jewish organizations that provide these services really as a help to the community, but also as part of their recruitment, really as part of their evangelization of folks. And that's not a bad thing, but we want to make sure that there are Muslim options for folks, so that does not become a factor. For me personally, this is a very important topic. I was an adopted child. I was a child in foster care. I was a child who was emancipated from an adoption. And I'm also a mother that has fostered and adopted. So I know intimately the need, the reason that folks are in these situations, and the blessing that both we can be for those young folks and that those young folks can be for us. So I will be speaking last. We are going to talk first about what the need looks like, and also some of the obstacles that folks perceive in Islam. We have Sister Christina Tobias Nahi, who is going to be talking about that. Then we're going to talk about actual experiences from our amazing partners in Michigan who are doing this work already. And then I'm going to bring in the end to talk about some of the special needs and considerations of working with youth in need of transitional spaces. So very quickly, I am going to turn it off because you all do not need to hear my voice more. I'm going to pass this off to Sister Christina, who is one of PFP's training team, as well as we share her, of course, with that other organization, with some other folks. But we are very happy to have her speak not only about her research, but her personal experiences as well. So, Sister Christina, do you want to do a better job of introducing yourself? And we will get started.
Thank you so much, Denise. No, I'm very excited about this topic this evening. It's something I'm really passionate about. So my name is Sister Christina, and I work for Islamic Relief, doing research and advocacy. And while I do have a portfolio that does include vulnerable children, and the causes are variable, whether it's climate induced, it's conflict and migration, and most recently COVID. I'm not actually going to be speaking on behalf of Islamic Relief. I'm going to be speaking in my personal capacity this evening. But I do have, an academic, a personal, similar to Denise, and a professional interest in the topic of caring for vulnerable children. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my studies, and one of them was at Harvard University, a Master's of Education, because there's an amazing program there I'm going to talk about later that actually looks at children in adversity. And I was able to take some of those courses, and I was already interested in kind of the adoption space as a student, took classes on nature versus nurture and things like that. And I am an adoptive mother of two now young adult children. And I worked for a number of years for an organization that it was called the Joint Council on International Children's Services in the Alexandria, Virginia area for a number of years. Unfortunately, it lost funding and it did end up folding. But we were very much immersed in this space and in these issues. So I come from, that experience as well. So
just let me jump in real quick. For those of you who have questions, please put them in the chat, because we have a bunch of folks who didn't hear my first spiel. We are going to be doing questions at the end of our three amazing speakers, well, two amazing and one speakers. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then we will get to them when the three speakers have gone.
Thank you. Yep. And so my task tonight was a little bit to set the stage, and also to talk about the why and the why right now. So whenever there is an international crisis, we see a heightened interest in exploring what is possible in the realm of international adoption. We saw it during the Syria crisis, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. We're obviously seeing that uptick of interest again with what's going on, unfortunately, in Gaza. These are not new crises. This is kind of a historical cyclical trend. One of the most famous baby lifts that many of you may be familiar with was the Operation Baby Lift that happened with the fall of Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, where they, were able to get many children, thousands of children out through these airlifts and bring them to the United States and Europe. Actually, in some of my previous research and looking into that, I had not known that one of those very first cargo flights, and it literally was a cargo flight, like they had the babies like strapped on the floor, and they had volunteers that were lying there amongst them, many of them the wives of American servicewomen and their children who were also trying to get out. That initial flight actually crashed. It didn't get far off the runway, and if you go back and look at old news clips, it's really horrific. A lot of those initial children that were coming out were children that were of mixed race, and were obviously children that were part Vietnamese and part American, African American predominantly, and they knew they wouldn't have much of a life there in Vietnam, so they were trying to get them out. And sadly, there was a lot of casualties in that crash. So kind of setting the state for that, the last big surge of interest within the Muslim community was when the Syria crisis was at its height. Unfortunately, this is a prolonged conflict. We're still in it, but there was a group of organizations in 2005, 2015, 2016 that had gotten some funding to look at kind of the historical context of what had happened during World War II and some of these exodus of Jewish children, and how they got them out of the Holocaust scenarios, and different groups that mobilized, whether through trains or other underground railroads, to get kids out. And there was some significant Jewish funding and other types of funding around this period, and they wanted to see if there might be the ability to replicate a similar types of exodus of the Syrian kids, and if there was even a need. So that funding was given to Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, which is one of the refugee resettlement agencies in the US. And they asked a number of other refugee resettlements and some non-refugee resettlement agencies, such as Islamic Relief, to join them on a field assessment. So there was Catholics, the Catholic bishops is one that went with them, HIAS, which is a Jewish organization, IRC, which is actually a non-denominational secular organization. So a number of these groups, we actually went on a field visit to a number of countries, to Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, to speak with a lot of the mothers and the children living in the camps and the urban residential areas where they had fled. They weren't all Syrian. Many of them were Palestinian. This was their second time being displaced. Although this, report and the research findings were looking at the Syrian kids. And one of the things was to see, A, were they really orphans? B, how would you even assess that? And C, even if they were, would that be the right move to displace them to another country that's not their religion, race, et cetera. And we spoke with social workers in the field. We spoke with ministries. We met with, children themselves. And really the consensus was that is not the right thing to do, is to bring children out of these situations, because most of them do have families. They might be lost in the time of conflict, but there are organizations such as the International Red Cross and others that can do family tracing and get the children back with a family member. It might not be a parent, but an extended family member or a neighbor or other people that they already knew and grew up with, and would enfold them into that environment. And so we actually took those findings. We wrote a big briefing paper. It's here if you're interested in it. And we took it to New York. We took it on Capitol Hill and tried to explain why that is not the right response in these moments of crisis. There's another research paper that I worked on, and this is a wonderful organization also in New York. It's called WISE, Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. And they do a number of different topical papers, and they bring in women researchers, and they have an Islamic Women's Shura Council. And they do them on diverse topics such as domestic violence. You can see that here, adoption, violent extremism, FGM, like a lot of things that are sensitive in our community and that they want to kind of look at with a lens, with a gender lens, and look at the Quranic texts and the verses and analyze them in a non-patriarchal way. So if you click on them, then it'll ask you for your email and you're able to download a report. So I helped work on the one about adoption because, again, this is an issue that I was immersed in for many years. So one of the things they did in that, and I'm not going to go too much into it because it's available on the website and you can download it and read it, but they looked at what they called the fiqh of adoption and how you need to balance the Quran and Sunnah and, you know, all of the verses that talk about the well-being of orphans on the one side, with then the Islamic restrictions from the pre-Islamic Arabian adoption practices on the other, and how you kind of untangle those complexities. And one of the verses that's very striking that they bring out is they say, and they ask you about orphans, say, make things right for them. Islah is better. And then they go into deconstructing that, and what does Islah means? To repair, to heal, and to make good. And that's what we need to do for these children. The other thing they unpack and tease out is they look at academic papers that have already been written and scholars that are experts on the subject. So one of the ones in this report is a report that was done by UNICEF and Al-Azhar around children in Islam, specifically around their care and their protection, which states that children deprived of parental care should be sponsored and provided for by people acting as if they were their parents. Now, why? They go into a number of different elements of protection being key, because as we know, there's a lot of verses in the Quran about protecting the wealth and the inheritance of the orphan, right? And you don't want to entangle that with your own. The protection of their dignity, because you don't want to see these children out begging on the streets or selling themselves sexually, right? So we need to protect their dignity. And as we're going to, I think, get to in some of the next sessions around fostering, and that Denise just alluded to, it's also a way to preserve and protect their religion without them going outside the fold of the deen. So those are just a couple of the points in there. Now, a lot of, they also go into a lot of the stigmas and all the haram questions. And I think, you know, they very much tease out a lot of those. They work with the different imams and bring out the different things around mahram and children of different genders and bringing them into your family and how you kind of can, in practical ways, overcome some of those obstacles. Now, the reason I bring that one up specifically, because obviously, as an adopted parent of a boy and a girl, right, these issues, and they were infants, and they came from a Muslim predominant country. These issues in the community at large, when we came to the United States, people were always like asking this and how we overcame some of these obstacles. So there was a wonderful organization when I worked for the Joint Council on International Children's Service that we partnered with, and they're called Spoon Foundation. They're in Portland, Oregon. So if you're interested in them, you can Google them or go to their website, spoonfoundation.org. And I got very close to the two women that founded this, and we used to do a lot of joint trainings with them. But they had started this organization when they adopted internationally children and realized there were like nutritional needs that, you know, they were trying to figure out. These children maybe don't eat because the palate's different, because actually they've been institutionalized. They don't know how to eat is actually a bigger challenge. Maybe they've been in a crib and they've never been held while they've been fed. They've been, you know, had a bottle plopped in their mouth and they don't properly know how to swallow. I mean, I had this experience with one of my own children. So they started this organization that has a lot of resources, goes overseas, does a lot of trainings, does trainings here with community members. But the reason I bring this up specifically is we actually did some research and papers around, okay, what do you do in the Muslim community, right? If you want, because feeding is a big issue, right? We have these kind of understanding if you want your children not to be marriageable, or the mother doesn't want to wear the hijab in front of the son, that she needs to breastfeed him. So there are ways to overcome this, both through medication, through pumping. And so we put some of this on this website as well, just to give resources also to Muslim families as well, kind of how they can do some of that. The other thing that I'll mention specific to this and the work we were doing is the adoption landscape has changed a lot over the last couple of, well, probably the last decade now, because it's really come out that a lot of these children, as I was stating earlier in the Syria case, were not true orphans, right? They were in a conflict in South America, for example, being one that's coming out a lot these days in the media, or in Ireland. You hear a lot about the young unmarried mothers and their babies were stolen away from them, and they were told they had died, and they were actually adopted out internationally, often to the US and other places. But these cases are coming out so much more prevalent in the news now, that so many children were trafficked. They were not true orphans. And because of this, a lot of countries have really, including the US, have really slowed down international adoption of healthy children. But there is always an incredible need for children who have been abandoned, that have physical, mental, emotional, social handicaps. And if you visit orphanages overseas, that's predominantly what you will see, is these children that they cannot even be adopted out because there aren't receptive families that are looking to do that, sadly. So whether it's by adoption or whether it's, children born into the families in our community here, I think there need to be a lot more resources as we're talking about creating spaces. There's a wonderful program that happens at Dar al-Hijra here in Virginia, although they haven't done it since the end of the pandemic. And they used to get sponsored by Islamic Relief to hold this event. It was actually run by a woman who had a brother who had been born with Down syndrome. So she understood the need growing up as a child, that she didn't feel like there were spaces, she and her family, where they could bring her brother to the masjid because, he wouldn't stay quiet, or he run around, or he talked at inappropriate times. And so she created like this wonderful event that she used to host every year, where they would invite all children with special needs within the Muslim community to come for these special Eid events. We at Islamic Relief would actually take our van and go pick them up if they didn't have the ability to be transported there. So you can see that here. And then, other family members would bring the children, and it was very sensory. There was a petting zoo. There was, an indoor bubble area. There was, low lighting, because there are different things that might set off the children, different textures and too much light exposure and sensitivities and things like that. So, I'm just, whether we have these children in our midst, whether they're coming from international adoption, whether they're born into our families, that are just not really visible in our community because there are not enough activities like this for them. So I want us to be cognizant about that. So going back to something I mentioned earlier, at Harvard, there's an interesting program called the Center on the Developing Child. And it was, established in 2006. They do a lot of research. They do a lot of events. And they really look at kind of the toxic effects of children in adverse situations early in their life, whether that is through being institutionalized, whether that's being in a disruptive, family environment, through foster care, through adoption, all of these things. There's a wonderful professor there. He used to sit on our board at the Joint Council, Dr. Charles Nelson, who is actually one of the preeminent experts in this area of like what happens to your brain and your neurons, and how this toxicity that you might grow up with early in life will have these long-lasting impacts all through your life. And he was one of the very early people that studied the children that had been in Romania again, back to what I was talking about earlier, where they had like ratio of children to adults was so large that many children didn't get touched, spoken to, didn't get to walk around and move around. And you can see all of these long-lasting effects. And so for those who are interested in more of these issues, whether you're, a therapist or just a parent or anyone really, there's another one of our board members, when I was at the Joint Council, so he's another expert on this early adversity, and his information, Dr. Dana Johnson's down at the bottom of this slide, but he works at the University of Minnesota, and they hold a conference every year on kind of adoption. They call it the adoption research, but it's as much on the fostering as well. And they talk about, all of these issues around, early mental health and social and emotional development, and why it's so important that children, receive care that's, even if it's not permanent, and I know we're going to talk today about transitional care, but even in that moment, whether it's transitional or permanent, that they're feeling loved, they're feeling safe, they're feeling protected. And that might be the end. So I will yield my time to the next speaker, to Rania, to kind of pick up from here and to talk about ruptured families and fostering here in the US, as well as some of the international fostering opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was really wonderful. Thank you. I think I could listen to you speak on that topic endlessly. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Did that? Wait a minute. There we go. Okay.
Go.
Does that look good?
Looks great.
All right, wonderful. Okay, my name is Rania Shbeeb. I am the co-founder and a board member for Muslim Foster Care Association. I'm also a licensed foster parent, and I've fostered both domestic and refugee foster children. When I became licensed, I immediately realized that there was a need for there to be a nonprofit, an organization to kind of connect the foster care system with the Muslim community. There was such a disconnect. There were so many gaps. I immediately noticed that the Muslim kids that were in care, their needs were not being met. Unfortunately, many of them were essentially, falling away from their deen, but only because nobody really knew better. And we know that children in foster care, it's very difficult for them to advocate for themselves and to have that voice. And so essentially what we were seeing is that a lot of children essentially lose their deen. And I knew right away, and even within the Muslim community, people in the Muslim community didn't understand what foster care is. What is foster care? What does it mean? There's so many misconceptions. And so I knew that we had to create this organization. I felt very compelled. So a friend of mine who is also a licensed Muslim foster parent, her and I joined together, and we decided that we were going to make this happen. So in 2016, we started the nonprofit called Muslim Foster Care Association. We are based here in Michigan. However, the work that we do, the bulk of our work is in Michigan, but we do get requests outside of Michigan, and we are more than happy to address any requests outside of Michigan as well. On the lower right corner here, you'll see a picture. This is part of our MFCA team. It's really grown over the years. We do have a full-time executive director, and it's something that, we've really been proud of. We do a lot of work, and there's still so much work to be done. So essentially, our goal is to support the Muslim children in foster care. So by doing that, we provide for their needs. We also have to support the agencies and the foster families that care for them. And we learned very quickly that the agencies and the foster families did not have the right training on the best practices for caring for Muslim children. So we had to address the agencies, the foster families. We also had to address the Muslim community and let them understand the need. There's such a shortage of licensed foster homes, and especially in the Muslim community. And then, of course, we need to address the needs of the Muslim children in care. So some of the services that we provide for the Muslims in care is we provide them comfort packages. We have financial assistance programs, especially when they're transitioning to independent living. For some of the youth that want to only eat halal, we have a halal meat program that we provide meat at reduced rates for them. We also provide them Eid gifts every year. We want to make sure that they continue to stay connected, that they continue to stay connected to the Muslim community. We have a mentorship program that they can join. So there's a list of services that we do to keep the children connected to the Muslim community. And as you can see, we serve both refugee and domestic foster children. So the unaccompanied refugee minors, those are essentially the refugee foster children. And they come to the US typically from countries of instability or war, and then they're brought to the US without their families and placed in either licensed homes or group homes, or whatever the placement is. Domestic foster children, those are children that are really throughout the US, kind of the local children that enter foster care mainly because of abuse and neglect. Those are the primary reasons, but of course there could be other reasons. With the refugee foster children, there are only 22 cities in the US that license for refugee foster care, and we're fortunate here in Michigan that we have 2 of those cities. So actually more than half of the Muslim children in Michigan that are in foster care are actually refugee foster youth. So it is a good part of the work that we do here. One of the examples that I'd like to mention is in the fall of 2021, there was a wave of children, hundreds of children that arrived unexpectedly from Afghanistan. And the federal government quickly realized that they were unprepared. They were using the same model that they were using for the children that were coming from Central America. They were using that same model on the children that were coming from Afghanistan. And they quickly realized that that model is not suitable for the children coming from Afghanistan. So they reached out to MFCA and they asked us to step in. And alhamdulillah, we were able to step in, and we were able to provide culturally sensitive services to the children and training to the agencies and the caretakers of the children. And we were able to stay with them and maintain connected with many of the kids until they were placed and transitioned into licensed homes or group homes. And we do continue to stay in touch with them to make sure, again, that their needs are being met. So there were so many gaps with that as well. And unfortunately, it was a mess initially. And it was a lot to take on, but alhamdulillah, the children were able to transition slowly. At the bottom picture here, this is actually one of the kind of trainings. I don't like to call them trainings, but kind of get-togethers that we had with the children from Afghanistan that were in Michigan. So we would meet with them regularly, and part of what we would do with them would be like a social activity, but it would also be something supporting their mental health, so that they had that interaction with Muslims in the community. And we would also do like small halaqas with them, so they had that spiritual growth as well. So when I learned that there were children in foster care, and this was for whatever reason kind of news to me, although I was born and raised in the US, I was not familiar with foster care. And so as an adult, when I became familiar with foster care and I realized that there were children in the system that needed stable homes, I felt compelled and felt that we had no excuse not to do something. So that's when we started our fostering journey. And I strongly believe that this is rooted in our faith tradition of Islam, and it is part of our sunnah. And my wish is for the Muslims to be at the forefront of foster care, and not just for Muslim children, but for all children in the foster care system. I truly believe that the Muslims can do it right, but we have to be involved, we have to be present, and we have to have a voice. And it's really inspiring when the agencies see what we're able to provide, the gaps that we were able to fill that they weren't able to do themselves. Then they see the value and the worth of bringing us in and having us partner with them. And the same goes with the foster families, because the foster families don't have to welcome us in their home. But when they see what we're able to provide for them and provide positive outcomes for the families and for the youth, then they're more inclined to reach out to us. And those are the strong relationships that we want to build. So we know, a Muslim home versus a home of another faith. Ideally, we know that to have the most positive outcomes is you want the child to be placed in a home that is most similar and familiar to them. So whether it's, language, culture, faith, they should be placed in homes as ideally where they can continue to grow those needs. And we know with foster care, essentially the goal is reunification with the birth parents. And so if we want the child to be reunited and to go back home, then it's best to maintain that consistency of what they're familiar with. And I'll give you some numbers. In Michigan, for example, we have over 170 Muslim youth in foster care in Michigan alone. And we have, I would say, around 10 licensed Muslim foster homes. So that just shows the majority of the kids are with families of other faiths. They're in group homes, and group homes are not an ideal place for foster youth. We want them in family-like settings where they can really be cared for. And then some of them, of course, are in independent living. But when Muslim children are placed in a home of another faith, that foster family can have all the best good intentions. But if they don't know how to care for a Muslim child, then they don't know. And like we said, the child themselves are not really in a position to speak up, especially if they're younger. So we also want to make sure that those families of other faiths also feel welcome in our Muslim community. If that family is bringing the Muslim child to the mosque on Fridays or for Eid, we want to make sure that the foster family, they're all welcome in those spaces. And again, being in a non-Muslim home, most of the youth will say that the most difficult part is Ramadan. Ramadan is a very difficult time, for the older youth that are fasting, to experience Ramadan, and even Eid is very difficult when they're with families of other faiths. So some of the challenges of fostering, of course, I truly believe that anything that has a lot of reward in it is going to also have a lot of challenges. And that's just something we have to expect. I know, we try to make fostering seem like, butterflies and wonderful. And there's so many wonderful things about it, but there's absolutely challenges. The biggest challenge for my family was the change in family dynamics, because I also have 3 children, birth children of my own that were already in the home. And so when you're adding in a new child, it definitely changes the dynamics of the family. The foster children have a lot more needs and they require a lot of attention. And so that attention is taken away from the other children that are in the home, and the children have to adjust to that. They're no longer, receiving kind of that primary focus of attention, and now that attention is being given to another child that really needs it. So that was a very challenging thing for my family, especially when my children were younger. But as they got older, they were able to adjust to that and kind of see the bigger picture, right? Like the children, it's harder for them to kind of gauge that large picture. So we would try to explain to them the rewards of fostering and how this is good for us and our family. But for children, it's hard for them to grasp that. So that was definitely one of the challenges. but the rewards are really wonderful. You know, it's really incredible to see what stability, safety, and love can do for a child's life. It can really turn their life around. And and seeing them reach those milestones that they never even thought possible. You know, one of my foster daughters, when she was in our home, we taught her how to drive. And she was able to get her driver's license. And she came from a country where a woman didn't really drive, and she thought that she would never in her life learn to drive. And so that was a really wonderful thing that she was able to reach that kind of level of independence. Also seeing them graduate from high school and graduate from college. These are, you know, really wonderful things to experience. One of our foster daughters during COVID time actually got married in our home. And then about a year or so later, we celebrated her baby shower also in our home. So seeing them reach those milestones is really wonderful. And these are the success stories that we want to see. And even with Muslim Foster Care Association, our goal is to be connected with the Muslim child as soon as they enter the foster care system. And for that, we rely on the agencies to notify us. And then our goal is that we stay connected with that child until either they are reunified with their birth family, or we continue even after they age out of foster care. We continue to stay connected with them because we know that that transition is so difficult. That's when they lose a lot of the supports that they were given once they age out. And so that is a critical time for us to continue to support them, you know, even after they've aged out of foster care. So why is safe space so important? We know that these children have experienced trauma, they've experienced instability in their lives, and they need a sense of security and consistency so that they can grow and reach those milestones. So we want to ensure that that space is both physically safe and emotionally safe. And the physical aspect, a lot of that is taken care of with the licensing agencies. You know, they go through the home, make sure that certain precautions, everything's taken care of and up to code. But emotionally safe, that's really the important kind of the core of it, because we need children to build trusting relationships. And unfortunately, when children enter foster care, they end up having a history of losing people that are close to them. They've been pulled from their families, their friends, their communities, their schools, and now they're placed in a completely new environment. And they need to have kind of a safe landing pad and an opportunity to build trusting relationships. And unfortunately, we know that for many foster children, they have multiple placements. So imagine not only going through that one time, but having to go through that repeatedly. So it's very important to ensure that those relationships are emotionally safe. We want to make sure that, oh, I mentioned that we want to make sure that children are placed in families that share their same values and their same culture as much as possible. And we want to make sure again that we understand their journey. So we can't just assume that we know. We really need to make it a priority to listen to the child and understand their journey. And this was just a really cool list that I saw online from the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. And a lot of this is what foster parent training. To become a foster parent, you do have to go through this training, and it's necessary because sometimes we think we know things, but you don't really know, right? So we can't assume we know what the child's journey has been or the home that they came from. We have to ask them, and we have to ask them what we can do to make them comfortable. One of the biggest things that I stress in my home is the confidentiality. So when a child comes to our home, with my children, even when they were younger, they know that we do not repeat, you know, what happens in the home. Anything that's related to the foster child is not repeated outside of the home. And people in the community are very curious, and they think it's okay to ask questions, but these questions are rather intrusive, and we need to respect the privacy of the child. And the foster children want to be children. They do not want the label of being a foster child. So we need to be very mindful of that. So this was just an interesting list that I thought I would share. So we want to make sure that the youth, the Muslim youth, stay connected to their faith in their community. So we should ask the kids, what can the community do better to make them feel comfortable? What can the masjid do? What can it, does it need to look different? Does some of the wording need to be different? We need to be careful about this. The youth programs in our mosques, the schools, if you have a foster child in your home, speaking to their school and letting them know. Again, they may not be trained in these sensitivities. So it's important to reach out to all of these spaces that the child engages in and make sure that people are culturally and sensitive to the fostering issues. And one important point here is, a lot of times the Muslim foster youth think they're alone. So I think connecting them with other Muslim foster youth, even if they're not right in your local area, is really important. They need that kind of support that only another foster youth can give them. So that's really important if we can do that. And like I said, maintaining anything that's familiar to them, trying to maintain that, asking them, what are the foods that you enjoy? What are some hobbies or games? What are your holidays look like? How do you celebrate Eid? People might have different ways of celebrating Eid. So again, we can't just assume that it's what we know. We have to ask. And here is a picture on the side. Like I said, MFCA, whenever a Muslim child enters foster care, we provide them with a comfort package. And the comfort package includes a Quran, a prayer cover for the girls, a prayer rug, prayer beads. And then we also ask if each child that enters care has any specific requests. So if they have any specific requests, then we try to meet those requests as well. It's essentially important to teach the child independence and to empower them. We know that when they're in foster care, so many decisions are made for them, and it's so structured that they don't really get that experience of knowing that they have a voice and practicing that. And we said that a lot of children, when they age out of foster care, unfortunately, they fall through the cracks at that point. So we want to make sure that we are teaching them independence, that we are empowering them to have a voice, and that they have a say in the things that they want. And another thing I always like to put out there is employment opportunities. I mean, I've experienced this with the older foster youth that were in my home. We're one of the milestones or things, learning experiences is to have a job, right? To have that financial independence, to be able to start saving money, to understand that, that have that financial understanding of budgeting. But first, they need to have the employment opportunities. And so one of the things that we can do in our Muslim communities is allow, if we have businesses or any job opportunities, is allow the youth that opportunity. And even if they make mistakes, having that patience with them. So that's very important as well. So last, I just want to put out there, if anybody wants to reach out to MFCA for any support or any questions, please stay in touch with us. And these are just some of our social media handles and website. The website really does have a lot of information. So if you have the time to look through that. And I could speak endlessly about personal experiences with fostering and, the joys of it. Alhamdulillah, it's really a blessing. But I know maybe in the questions, if there's any questions at the end, we can do that. Thank you. I'll turn the mic over to Denise. Oh, you're on mute, Denise.
Thank you so much for this beautiful representation. And let me share my screen and try to pull up what I have. I don't know. Share.
He's doing that. I will just do one quick intervention because I forgot to make this transition. But, because I've worked in the space of international adoption for a couple of decades now, there are often Muslim families that are not able to form families on their own or for various reasons that do come in and ask about how it works. And I'm happy to answer those questions too, although like much as a foster, some of that state specific. But what I always try and remind them, there are these great needs here in the US and there are so many children here. And I think that's part of what we wanted to convey today as well.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. And actually, I am not going to go into full mode because I need to see some of the other things that I'm managing at the same time. So what I want to do is to talk a little bit about some of the skills, some of the things that might come up, and what are some of the special, what we call considerations around creating safe spaces for Muslim youth in transition. Now, what I will say is I'm going to be as honest as I can be, and that is not always easy because we need to know what to expect. We need to know what our expectations are, and I do that as someone who came through the fostering and adoption system. So I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about my kids. I'm talking about my nieces that I've fostered. So keep in mind, I'm not sort of outwardly focusing on the negative experiences. That was also me. So let's talk about why a Muslim child might be in transition. And Sister Rania gave us some early indications as well as Sister Christina. So there's a wide variety of reasons why any child might be in transition. A family disruption, parental illness, incarceration, travel, parent gets stuck in another country, investigation of child protective services. So it might not even be anything that is proven, but the child needs to be away from the home at the moment. Neglect, abuse, physical and sexual, spiritual abuse, right? We need to know how Islam was used. And because we know that there's Islamophobia, there are children who are removed because of spiritual abuse or questions about spiritual abuse. Poverty, which should not be a reason that a child is removed, but many times is. The child's disability, and Sister Christina talked about that as well, that parents really are not able to function within the level of disability or the medical or physical or mental health need that the child has. Unable to live peaceably with family. And sometimes we see this in older foster care. What we see is what we call people in need of supervision, that the child and the family just cannot find a peaceful space between themselves, in need of supervision, and all of these other reasons. So there's no one fostering or adoption story. Children are in transition for a wide variety of reasons. And I actually didn't put in the obvious that we talked about, which is war and conflict. So what do children in a transition situation need? As Sister Rania told us, what they need mostly is safety. And safety is not just, having security cameras around the house. Safety is really the feeling of being able to turn off your security system internally because you are going to be safe, you are going to be okay. So obviously kids need basic needs, shelter, clothing, food, all of those kinds of things. They need respect for their individual characteristics and experiences. And unfortunately, the foster care systems that we have in place are not always able to do that. They need some amount of flexibility. So those rules that we have for the kids that we've had since they were born may not be able to be enforced in the same way with a child who has grown up differently and has not always been in our home. They need stability, right? They need to know that, and many times as Sister Rania was talking about, kids will come to us legally and then they will go, but they will come back to us because they know we are a stable force in their lives. They need understanding. So yes, they need discipline, they need safety, but they also need somebody who can look at the world through their eyes and not necessarily through the expectations that we each have. They need obviously compassion, right? This somebody who has a heart to really understand and give them what they need. And many times, as you've heard over and over again, they need advocacy because they cannot do that for themselves. And that's something that we have to be able to step in to do. Now, children in transition may be different from you and your family. So when you open your doors into a child in transition, you are not getting a your child, the child that you raised, right? You are getting someone else, an individual who is complete. And just because they are Muslim, they may have had very different experiences, and they may have had they may have very different attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So some of these differences may include values and behaviors, right? Values and beliefs. Um, just because we are all Muslim does not mean we all think and act the same way. So you have to be sort of understanding that I am sheltering, I'm offering a safe place to another Muslim, but that doesn't mean that I am going to impose sort of what I believe and the way that my family lives. They may have different educational experiences. So they may not be the A child that you've raised in your own house. They may have learning disabilities. They may have had significant educational disruptions. They may not have the same physical abilities. I was thinking, even one of my nieces we brought, and we were like, yay, we're going to go ice skating. And it was the most horrific experience for her ever, because she did not like the feeling of instability that it brought. So, deciding to go on a family hike, for example, that may or may not be something that gets a young person in transition excited, especially if they're coming from the city and they've never been out. And one of my nieces is like, no bugs ever. Why did you bring me here? Right. So we need to keep in mind all of those kinds of differences. Lifestyle differences. So what are they used to? Right? Do they go to masjid, every single week? Were they in a family that was just culturally Muslim? Do they stay up very, very late? Or is there, there isn't really rules about eating or going to bed and all of those kinds of things. Their behavior. So we have, all of us inside of us, little points of things that make no sense but make us crazy, right? I remember I have 4 adopted children. They were family adoption, but they were still adopted. And we had a thing about dishwashing and whether the water should be hot or cold. And I never thought about it as much as I did when I had a kid in my house that was like, you are doing this wrong. And I was like, oh. So small things, the smaller things that you can't imagine, will get in our way. Communication style. So a lot of these kids are in positions where communication has not been open and direct. We last summer we were going to do a temporary placement for someone, and my older kids were interviewed, and they're like, my mom is really direct, and I was like, thank you. So a lot of the kids, I remember being in homes with kids who would hide things because it wasn't safe to tell the truth. It wasn't safe to say you made a mistake. So communication style may be very different, and even ways of worshiping. So we may get kids in our homes that are much more strict about things than we are, and that's an interesting kind of place to be, or who are much more lax about the way that they practice Islam. And we have to kind of be ready for anything when we open our doors and invite a child in. What is true? Let me go backwards. What is true is that almost no child ends up in transitional care without some amount of trauma. And trauma means something that was not supposed to happen, right? Whatever that might be. Now, trauma, we have an idea of what trauma looks like in kids by, the Hallmark movie. So the kid is crying or they're nervous and to be honest, trauma does not always look like that when it walks through your door and stays in your living room. Trauma looks different in different children, depending on their biological characteristics, their heredity, their experiences, and what they were taught to do about trauma. So trauma may include anger, frustration, jealousy, sadness, fear, acting out, testing boundaries, over obedience, that what we call that honeymoon phase, where the child is like, yes, I will clean all of your floors. Yes, I will go and I will, which also doesn't last, and if it does last, is not necessarily healthy. So we know that trauma does not always look like trauma. Trauma oftentimes gets labeled as, this kid is just bad. And especially if they're coming to you after a family transition or a family disruption, they may have heard that, and you may hear that from caseworkers, from parents, from other folks. So what I ask people to do is to keep in mind where those behaviors came from and what they are there to function for the child. What are they protecting the child from? What are they advocating for the child for? Trauma reactions that we expect to see are really physical. So even if a child can say to you, yes, I understand, there are things that our bodies do after our bodies have been in danger that we don't have a lot of control over. And some of the sort of most common are fight, right? I feel in danger, so I'm going to fight my way out of this. Flight, I'm going to run away. And we see that a lot with some of our foster kids. Freeze, I'm just going to look. And sometimes this makes adults crazy too. They're like, or laugh. How can you be laughing at me? What are you not understanding? Know that that's a biological reaction to feeling like you're in danger. And then friend is that I will do anything you want. I open my eyes really big. I am there to just meet all of your needs, because I'm not confident that anybody's going to be there to meet mine. None of these are good or bad. They just are. They are full biological, chemical reactions to not having been safe for a lot of our kids for the most part of their lives. So there is this question of, okay, it sounds like it's really hard. Why would I do this, right? Why should I do this? Creating safe space for children in need has many facets. So you can help in a million ways. Fostering may not be your way. Maybe it's taking a donation. Maybe it's, doing a visit with kids. Maybe it's doing other kinds of things. Maybe it's calling your congressman and making sure there are good laws to protect them. So there are many, many ways of creating safe spaces for children. Deciding to offer temporary shelter is a very personal decision that should be made thoughtfully. We all see the kids in Gaza and say, I just send them. I'll take care of them. Just send them. But we need to really take time and think through, for our families, for our own situations, for that child themselves, what is going to be best for them. We also cannot offer assistance because we want a good deed to earn Allah's favor. Like, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to sacrifice. And children know when they are an obligation. And we do not want anyone to feel like an obligation. We cannot assist because we feel like this person is going to feel gratitude toward us. They are going to be so thankful. They are going to love us. They are going to, it doesn't, my oldest daughter, when she first came to the United States, used to call me, and I was like 24 at the time. She called me the old lady. Tell the old lady this, tell the old lady that. This was not what I was expecting, okay? So we don't do it with the idea that we are going to have gratitude. It is not to prove that you're a good person. Good people do many, many things. Offering temporary care is something that you have to love and have a passion for and enjoy. It is not to be a savior, right? I am going to save these children from all of, because we can't. We can't do that for our own children. We certainly cannot do that for children that are coming to us, and they don't expect that of us, to be honest. And not to find someone to love you. Well, somebody in this world. It doesn't work that way. So you want to make sure that if you are doing this, you are doing it for the right reasons. And what are the right reasons? Because they need it. Because you can provide it without difficulty to yourself, which, I mean, of course there's some difficulty, but you should not be doing things that are, well, I'm working a full-time job and I have 5 kids of my own, but I feel like I should do this. Maybe let somebody else who maybe has more time, more resources, more ability. So you want to make sure that it is something that you can provide that is not going to put yourself or your own family at loss. It feels natural to you. For me, taking care of kids, I have kids in and out of it just is something I do. I have formally fostered, I have informally fostered, I have legally adopted, I have informally adopted. It is something that is just part of our life. If that feels normal to you, then that is something that is coming from your heart. And it's something that you want to do, even though you understand how hard it is. It has to be your heart's desire. It really does have to. It is not something you can oblige yourself or someone else to do. What do you need? So we talked a lot about what the kids need and all of that, but you as a foster parent, or you as somebody offering temporary or permanent lifetime care are also going to need some things. One is that you need to have a generally happy and stable family yourself. If you are looking at divorce, if you are, you have just lost a child, that might not be the best moment to foster or to offer temporary care, because you are not stable. We just talked about how stability is really important to get. Now, this is not to say that you have to have a perfect house with a white picket fence and a perfect family either, but that you generally are living a life that feels happy and stable to you. You also need a strong, supportive social support network, because there are some days that your own children are going to make you crazy. There are going to be times with children that are not yours that you're going to have to face things that you didn't necessarily want to know about war, about abuse, about sexual abuse, about parents, about what they can do, what they can't do, about other Muslims. So you're going to need your own social service, actually, yes, but your own social support team that you can go to and say, or cry to, or stay up all night and worry with. You're going to need some spiritual and psychological resources. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be in therapy, but that means that everybody needs to have a good book or a good imam or someone that they can call when things are beyond what you understand. The child is now doing this. I've never seen this before. Is this okay? What does this mean? The child is saying these things. The child is refusing to pray, whatever. You need some good spiritual and psychological resources around you as well. You need a sense of humor. Kids are hilarious or crazy making, right? So you have to kind of choose that they're hilarious and be able to laugh about a lot of the amazing, beautiful, off the wall things that you are going to hear. A feeling of purpose. So if you are going to offer care, you need to know sort of why you're doing it, right? That this is really important to me. That I feel, for me, as a child who was in care, I feel not obligated in a bad way, but obligated in a good way. These are my children. These are my sisters and brothers. These are no different than I was. But everybody needs to have that feeling of purpose. You have to be a little bit courageous. It is scary. It is scary for the kids. It's scary for you to open your house to someone you don't know, and you don't know what they're bringing with them, and you don't know all of the experiences that they have had, and they have truths that are dark and that are painful. And you have to have the courage to what we call accompany them. You don't have to fix them. That is in the hands of Allah. And some things can't be fixed, but you have to be brave enough to sit with them and to hear those stories and to understand their reactions. And a passion for justice for children. And I think you've heard that from all of us. The idea of knowing that what children have is not always the best that the world has to give them, and that we passionately believe that we need to do better. One of the hardest things I think people talk about with temporary care is, how would I let them go? right? I can't ever do that. I've had people tell me that all the time. I could never do that because then they leave. And what we say, they are temporarily in your home, they are forever in your home. And we know that so many of these kids come back to us for their weddings, come back to us for their baby showers, come back to us for graduation, and some are not able to. But we know that we are a planted seed. They will remember something that they learned in our home. They will remember something that they learned with us. So that yes, you let them go, but you never really let them go from your best intentions and your best thoughts. Okay, so we have a little bit of time set aside for questions. Let me stop sharing. There we go. And let me see if there's anything in the chat real quick. Anything? I don't see anything offhand. Folks can also unmute and ask their questions live. Any last questions that our speakers had that they want to catch up on or ask each other, that is also an option. Okay, Sister Rennie, I have a question for you. So how does one become a foster parent? What are some of those first steps?
Yeah, so the first step is reaching out to an agency near you that does foster care licensing. And they will tell you that the first step is attending an orientation. And if you are married, then you and your spouse both have to attend the orientation. That's one of the things I always get asked is, we want to foster, but, my husband's too busy. Can I just do it? No, actually, you both have to go through the process, the training, but the very first step is attending an orientation. And ever since COVID, after COVID, it's become actually very convenient. A lot of the orientations are offered online. And a lot of the trainings are offered online. They say it takes 3 to 6 months to go through the fostering license process. We were able to do it in 3 months. I really think it's just a matter of, kind of how committed you are to turning in the paperwork and getting through the training.
Okay, and my second question for you is, what do you physically need? So what does your home need? What do you like? What kind of supervision do you need? What do you have to be able to offer foster care?
So the physical requirements of the home are actually pretty minimal. I mean, there are certain things like there's a square footage requirement for the room that the child is in, but I don't know the number offhand, honestly. But it's rather minimal. The child does have to have their own bed. That's important. But they can actually share a room with another child, but they do have to have their own bed. I was going to say something and I totally forgot. Oh my goodness, I hate when I lose my thought. But they also check some other things. For example, they'll check your water temperature. If you live in Michigan or if you live in a state where you might have a basement, in Michigan, many homes have basements, the basement has to have an egress, which means it has to have, a window egress or a door egress. And actually, that's actually limited many people that I know that don't have that in their basements in Michigan, but that is a requirement. So, but other than that, to be honest with you, the physical requirements are actually pretty minimal. Also part of the process is they do background checks, they ask for references, they will interview everybody in the household. They ask for all of your finances. So they want to know all of your monthly expenses, and they also want to know your income, and you have to show proof of that. So many people find that intrusive, but to be honest with you, it really is for the safety of the child, to make sure that they're in a stable home.
Christine, I want for you too. When we think about the obstacles that people believe are in Islam against adoption or against fostering, what are some of the thoughts? What are some of the things that you have learned to be able to talk to specifically Muslims about, opening up their homes to children that are not born of them.
Yes, obviously not being, an imam or a scholar, and we did talk about it would be nice to have one on this call, or if people have further questions, they can always turn to the spiritual leader of the community that, that they trust. But a lot of this does get pulled out in that adoption and care of orphans paper by WISE that's available online. But, generally you hear the it's haram types of questions all the time. And that usually does come back to the mahram questions around gendered issues, whether it's veiling, whether it's boys and girls, and they're going to be able to marry one another. They're not biologically related and being raised in the same home. And that's why I say, where there are these issues, there are also solutions to them that have already been given to us within our deen, giving breast milk to the child to make them the same as a biological and blood related, and you can do things like that. And I'll just say one misconception too. I think a lot of people, I often hear in trainings and things I've done, we're much more interested in adopting because we want an infant because they come malleable. But the trauma is generational. I mean, if that child has been abandoned for some reason, whether that's poverty, whether that's a conflict and war, whether it's, they've been conceived because of a sexual violence or whatever it is, you really don't often know those circumstances, and that trauma, they do carry it even if they're infants, and they might not realize it until they're older as well, and you have to tease that out. So that misconception that by taking in an infant you won't be experiencing some of these things is not true. And that's why even in international adoption there's the same kind of background checks and home studies and learning sessions for prospective parents to make sure that they're ready and know what they might be getting into as well. But again, not to discourage anyone.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And as a psychologist, I'm always like, but people have biogenetics as well, right? So learning disabilities, all sorts of characteristics are going to be different because the child is not. And in some ways, that's good. Believe me, my biological characteristics are not always what I want to live with. Sometimes living with somebody else's is not as bad. But yeah, their infants come as fully complete organisms that have their own likes and dislikes and temperament and all of those things. So they're not as, sort of a white sheet that you can sort of write on as one would think as well. Beautiful. Any other questions from our audience? I am gonna also stop the video so that there's confidentiality in questions if folks have that. Okay. If we do not have any other questions, I'm going to give each of our speaker a chance to do a last sort of appeal to folks, and then we will be finishing up because I know it's also getting late and folks have family things to attend to as well. Any last words?
I'll just say kind of something that you had touched on is, even if you don't feel that you are a family that can foster, for whatever reason, know that there are other ways to support foster youth, being an advocate for them, even providing respite for a licensed foster family, sometimes if they need to travel or if they need a break on the weekend, helping with transportation, helping with meals. So there's so many ways to support foster children, even if you don't feel that you're in a place of being able to foster yourself.
Absolutely. Sister Christina?
No, I couldn't have said it better than that, to be honest. Yeah, those are wonderful words of wisdom to maybe end on. Yeah.
I, from the point of view, both as an individual and as PFP, I want to really extend my deepest gratitude to both of our partners in this, not only for helping us this evening to open and expand this conversation, but for the amazing work that you both do in the communities and the service that you give to kids who need it. As one of those kids who needed it, I cannot tell you how important that one safe adult was wherever they were. So I'm very, very grateful for all of the work that you do and very thankful. I also am thankful for our PFP trainers. This topic came to us really out of a discussion of frustration, where by coincidence, we had all gotten this different call with the same need. I've heard that the concern about we as Muslims, we need to do something. We don't want to have our kids lose their deen. We don't want kids not to have somewhere to go. We don't want, there to be babies in need. So I thank the PFP network as well for bringing this up. And inshallah, really, if all of you are interested, we are going to have this on a right now back burner just because our front burners are pretty full. But this is an area where we know that there is a great need in all of our cities. Michigan, we applaud you for making this effort, but we also need to replicate you across the country. And we're going to be looking at ways to make this part of our conversation as well. So if any of you are interested, please send us an email and we will put you on sort of our back burner committee on how we need to address this nationally as a Muslim Ummah. So thank you so much. Masalam. Take care, everyone. We are now in our 10 days almost, starting tomorrow. So bless 10 days, first days of Hajj and Eid in a very short time. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.